Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. The federal government is about to spend more servicing old debt than it spends on Social Security. Congratulations. According to the latest numbers, debt interest is now the single largest line item in the federal budgets, bigger than Social Security, bigger than healthcare, 1.5 times what we spend on the military-industrial complex. At $1.4 trillion is more than double what it was just 2 years ago, and it comes to nearly $900 per month per household in America just in federal interest. Of course, that's not including the $18 trillion of private debt, so mortgages, car loans, consumer loans, which brings it to $1,350 in debt interest per month for the typical American family, which is close to what we spend on housing. Put differently, 28 cents of every dollar the federal government seizes from the people, collects in taxes, goes right out the back door to Wall Street and China. It's 47.5 cents as a percent of the income tax you pay. Keep in mind, this does not include new debt, which Biden's handlers are on track for a $1.9 trillion deficit, which is a fresh $15,000 of national debt per household in a single year. The problem, of course, is that both parties are addicted to spending. Democrats want social spending, a good chunk of which goes to their army of left-wing activists. Republicans don't bother feeding their activists. They just feed the donors so they can blow up Ukraine's. Now, we can imagine a world where instead of horse trading welfare for warfare spending, they instead trade cuts in spending. That's actually how it worked before the Federal Reserve, FDR, and Richard Nixon killed the gold standard. To illustrate, we currently have $36 trillion in federal debt. Now, adjusting for inflation and population size, at pre-Nixon levels, it would be 6 times smaller. At pre-FDR levels, it would be 287 times smaller. At pre-Fed levels, it would be 500 times smaller. This suggests it's very easy to fix, close the Fed, restore the gold standard. Alas, that is easier said than done. So some common suggestions include a bipartisan commission like we used for base closings in the 1990s, or the perennially doomed balanced budget amendment, or my personal favorite, Warren Buffett's suggestion that if Congress can't pass a budget, they all have to resign. With a lifetime ban from politics, they would find a way. Of course, all of these would require adults negotiating in good faith, and this is Washington. Now, Trump tried trillions of cuts pre-COVID, and Congress laughed him off. That was both parties enjoyed the laugh. Leaving the standard historical outcome, the debt gets so big investors panic, they dump government bonds en masse, setting off a system-wide financial crash. So what's next? It's easy to doom porn the debt. $36 trillion is a lot of money after all. And Washington looks light years from a solution unless Doge can work some serious magic. Still, we only have 2 options: let the frog boil, plunging the nation into crisis, or do everything we can to hold the uniparty's feet to that fire while there's still time. New jobs numbers are out, and hilariously, payrolls jumped 227,000, yet persons employed dropped 355,000. Are they just making it up? The numbers are from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who, thanks to the power of imagination, reports that jobs are booming, yet the unemployment rate is worse, rising to 4.2% unemployment. It's actually 7.3%, using the wider U6 unemployment number that media only reports when the president is Republican. So how does payroll soar but unemployment get worse? Because the other job survey the BLS uses says the number of employed people actually plunged by 355,000 last month. So jobs went up 227, people employed went down 355. Now it's worth noting plus 227 in a month is a job boom for the ages, minus 355 is a depression. Which is it? Who knows? Keep in mind this is the same agency reporting both numbers, and this report was widely touted as a critical guide for the Fed, who is also kind of left with who knows. Now, regular people might wonder, how could they be so far off? And the short answer is government numbers on everything from jobs to inflation to growth contain an entire library of statistical assumptions, models, and survey techniques to creatively extrapolate. Now, the gaps should tell them that their models are currently garbage, but of course those assumptions are extremely useful to agencies who can torture the numbers to say anything they want. This is particularly useful when your budget is up and you need to show you're a team player or not a team player if the president is named Donald Trump. In other words, follow the money. When the president is somebody the bureaucrats like, say a Democrat, assume the worst, and when the president is somebody the bureaucrats are trying to hurt, assume that's what's driving it. So with that, what else was hiding in the jobs report? Beyond the 355 plunge in persons employed, Zero Hedge reports the number of long-term unemployed is stuck at 1.7 million. That's up nearly 50% on the year. Labor force participation, which is the percent of people working or in school, is also stuck, down 2 million since pre-COVID, down 4 million from the Trump 1.0 trend, and down 9 million since the 2008 crisis and the ensuing Obama miracle. Incidentally, BLS reports that 5.5 million people out of the labor force actually want a job, but they're not counted as unemployed because they're not actively looking. That's interesting because there are more than 5.5 million illegals hogging up low-skilled jobs and keeping them at minimum wage. Seems like a pretty simple fix. Speaking of illegals, that was one bright spot in the jobs reports, a tumble in illegal immigrant workers, perhaps because hundreds of thousands are preparing to self-deport, or at least they're going to ground. If it is self-deportation, we are due to see a surge in wages for low-skilled Americans who no longer have to compete for minimum wage. We're already seeing green shoots as real hourly earnings stopped falling last month, breaking a 2.5-year downward trend. Keep it up and blue collars might actually be able to support a family on a factory job. So what's next? Jobs was supposed to give the Fed guidance with inflation rising again. Goldman called it, quote, the most important remaining macro report of 2024. Sadly, what they got from our finest federal statisticians was maybe plus a bunch, maybe minus a bunch. And so the Fed is left once again with no idea what's happening, a blindfold elephant in the china shop with regular Americans dodging the fallout. A word from our lead sponsor, Unchained.com. The holidays are coming. It's time to think about your annual IRA contributions. And the IRA is an investment vehicle that can save you a lot of taxes. And with Unchained, you can hold real Bitcoin in your IRA, get access to trading, inheritance, and loans. And it's the only company where you hold the keys and can verify that your Bitcoin is not being relent like banks do. We've seen futures-based ETFs underperform holding your own Bitcoin, so why settle for less? Book a friendly consultation at unchained.com/IRA. If you own gold, you're probably very happy with prices hitting all-time highs. But your gold can do more. It can generate passive income for you. With monetary metals, you earn up to 5% interest on your gold and silver paid in more ounces. Accredited investors can earn double-digit returns in their bond offerings. All interest is paid in ounces of gold and silver stored in your account free of charge. If your metal is gathering dust at home or costing storage fees in a vault, it is time to start putting your metal to work with Monetary Metals. Visit monetary-metals.com/Peter today to learn more. Now back to our show. Europe's governments are dropping like flies, with France and Germany falling in the past month alone, while Britain reaches a, quote, historic drop in approval ratings, down 49 points. What's driving the carnage is a Europe-wide attempt to shut out surging populists, which is leading to unstable Frankenstein coalitions of parties who agree on nothing. They may even despise each other. They are united only in one thing, clinging to power in defiance of voters who have had enough. The two essential ingredients are Europe's globalist elite losing touch with voters, and the experience of total control during COVID, fortified by a deep state that would make an American blush. Europe's elites are having a very hard time letting go of that power. Now, as in America, Europe's globalist bundle includes open borders, trade deals that decimate the working class, economy-crushing green mandates, and the woke censorship regime it uses to silence dissent and crush cultural traditions. This bundle, of course, is enthusiastically promoted by Europe's Leviathan deep state, which is nearly twice the size as the U.S., at 1/5 of the European population working for the government. This progressive strangulation is causing voters to flood to populists who have leapt from a fringe movement to winning over a quarter of the vote in Europe-wide EU elections. In France, they won 33% before the mainstream left and right joined to shut them out in a Frankenstein coalition. Germany used a similar ruse to shut out the surging populist AfD, currently the number 2 party in the country. In Britain, the surging populists helped deliver 37% of the vote to the right, by far the highest, but the split vote handed the country to a crazed communist who arrests 11-year-olds and grandmothers for mean tweets. Now, what's putting teeth into Europe's response is that second factor, the absolute power they wielded during COVID. I've talked in recent videos how dangerous this is, what total power does to an elite even if held temporarily. The iconic example is World War I, which gave totalitarian control across the West in the name of the war. The men who held that power spent the rest of their lives chasing that authoritarian high, a scrambling horde of Smeagol's reaching for the One Ring. Sadly, they succeeded, delivering a Great Depression and a Second World War to cull Europe's remaining population. This time around, the authoritarian wave is already forming, so France is trying to convict populist leader Le Pen, like our own Democrats tried with Trump. Germany is trying to literally ban the AfD in the name of democracy, not a joke. So what's next? Europe's jihad against the people may work in the short run, but it will backfire spectacularly. The reason is that the genius of democracy is it's a pressure valve to correct policy that's gone off the rails. Europe has unplugged that pressure valve just when the water's on the verge of boiling. So Europe's Frankenstein coalitions may horse trade their way to another couple of years of power, but the longer they suppress dissent, the stronger is the backlash. We just saw that here in America with a Trump 2.0 that is far more radical than Trump 1.0. The longer Europe holds back the dam, the bigger will be the burst. Inflation is rising again, yet another ticking time bomb the Biden regime is handing Donald Trump. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, who tallies inflation, is out with new numbers showing both CPI and core CPI rising at an annualized 3.8%. That's up from under 1% just 6 months ago, and it takes the year-on-year to 2.7% inflation, which is about 40% above the Fed's alleged target. Now, for those following along at home, it's been over 3.5 years since Jerome Powell told us inflation was transitory. At some point, people might stop believing him. The worst of it, once again, is housing, up nearly 4% annualized, and food, up nearly 5% annualized. Gasoline was up 7.5% annualized. Note all that's with China dumping cheap imports ahead of potential Trump tariffs. So what's driving inflation's zombie return? In short, government spending and the money it creates. That's what launched Bidenflation. As COVID spending flooded the country to buy lockdowns, Jerome Powell's hikes took the edge off strangling the private sector to clear the highway for government spending. But once those hikes started taking down banks last year, Jerome panicked and eased off the hikes. Meanwhile, Jerome also slashed Fed's treasury sales, so-called quantitative tightening. Since deficits were so large, there were fears that nobody would buy treasury bonds if the Fed were selling. So the government was still pumping out inflation. In fact, it was getting worse, going from a $1.4 trillion deficit in 2022 to $1.8 trillion in 2024, but the rate hikes that were hiding that inflation had stopped. In raw numbers, that means from October of 2022, the money supply shrank by $700 billion, about 3.5%, which brought inflation down from 8% to 3%. But in the past year, that flipped to growth of $600 billion in money, which is why inflation stopped falling. In fact, it is picking up again. Then, to put a cherry on it, Powell actually cut rates starting in September, which is bizarre since inflation was running hot. Why did Jerome lower rates when inflation was so far above target? One reason might be to save the banks, which were blindsided by the Fed's rate hikes. Hikes make bonds worth less, and U.S. banks are sitting on trillions of U.S. Treasury bonds. Another reason, of course, is that there was an election to buy, and rate cuts give you that pleasing tissue fire that was supposed to haul cackles over the line. So what's next? Given the inflation bomb they're handing to Trump, he will need to either massively cut federal spending or massively grow the economy. This is because inflation is fundamentally how much money is chasing how much stuff. So either reduce the money, government spending, or increase the stuff, economic growth. As for the Fed, odds actually rose of a rate cut at the next meeting, suggesting markets expected even worse inflation, but figured Jerome's the kind of guy who does inflationary cuts when inflation is rising. This is concerning because if you overlay a chart of Bidenflation, the peak and the current zombie resurgence, it looks eerily similar to the 1970s, where inflation got a second wind that ended up worse than the first and lasted nearly 5 years with double-digit inflation and double-digit unemployment. So Donald Trump has his work cut out for him. A word from our sponsor. If you run a business and want to get customers excited about your loyalty and rewards program, you can now implement Bitcoin rewards with Oshi Loyalty. You get all the perks of a full-featured loyalty and reward program with real Bitcoin rewards every time your customers shop, refer, and engage. Boost customer retention, loyalty, and lifetime value. And if you're looking for Bitcoin rewards when you shop, check out the dozens of companies in the Oshi marketplace at Oshi, that's OSHI.tech/shop. Start earning Bitcoin today. Now back to our show. How did American healthcare get so bad? Why do we tolerate a system where you go bankrupt for a hip replacement? Compared to socialized medicine, on almost any metric, the U.S. has one of the best medical systems in the world. Doctors per capita, hospital bed capacity, waiting time, surgical outcomes, access to specialists. I'm not saying it's great, I'm saying almost everybody else is worse. The problem is this comes with nosebleed prices and a funding system that is corrupt, mind-boggling, complicated, and often outright predatory. So U.S. healthcare costs 2.5 times the average in the OECD, and it can feel like a reverse lottery where every so often it wipes you out, you go back to start. So what went wrong? In short, America's healthcare is expensive because it's lovingly written by lobbyists, insurers, hospitals, trial lawyers, and especially the doctors' union, the American Medical Association. Like all regulation, every word is designed to benefit the industry and the doctors' union, never the patient. These rules ban competition and drive up prices. They push over-treatment and over-prescription. And above all, the system hides the cost to patients, leaving insurers to police hospitals in ways that destroy patients. So how to fix it? Well, happily, it wasn't always this bad. Our crony medical system is a creature of a World War I era effort by the AMA, the doctors' union, to outlaw competition and drive up prices. The AMA destroyed the system of voluntary co-ops that provided care for nearly all Americans, and that by holding down prices meant that any poor person in America was treated for free. So members would pay a fee less than $100 a month in modern terms for health care, disability, and life insurance that included a so-called lodge doctor who was on call for members and would do house calls. The AMA, of course, hated this system because it was too cheap, so they broke it. First, they took over licensing to radically cull the number of new doctors, which drove up the price, ended house calls, and gave us 11-plus years of medical school. Then they lobbied to deny lodge doctors hospital privileges, even to deny emergency care to lodge members. This wiped out the lodge system, replaced by heavily regulated and very well-paid AMA members. Finally, the AMA made it literally illegal to practice medicine without their license. Now, after this union takeover, every ongoing reform made it worse, driving up prices and shutting out competition, because every reform is written by the AMA and incumbent companies. So 1973 HMO Act, 1985 COBRA Act, 1997 CHIP, 2003 Part D, and of course Obamacare, all written by union and industry for union and industry. So what's next? It's tempting to try and fiddle the edges to promote price transparency, high deductible plans, co-payments that control costs. These are doomed so long as government effectively runs healthcare in America, because government rules will always be written by the lobbyists. That leaves the radical solution: go back to the co-ops. They do still exist, so the Amish use medical co-ops. 3 states still have small functioning co-ops, Maine, Wisconsin, and Montana, but it would take a root and branch disgorgement of the tens of thousands of mandates and regulations that make up our crony medical system, replaced with the original intent of affordable, pooled risk that actually serves the patient. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.